The vast, star-dusted canopy of a Pannonian night arched over the sleeping legion. Here, on the very edge of the Roman world, along the dark, winding artery of the river Danubius, the great military camp of Carnuntum lay breathing in the cool air of late autumn. The day's clamor had long since dissolved into the earth. The rhythmic tramp of marching feet, the sharp commands of centurions, the clang of the training sword, all of it now just a fading echo held in the memory of the war. Landscape, a profound quiet had descended, a quiet not of emptiness, but of deep and settled presence. It was the quiet of 10,000 men surrendering to the gravity of sleep, a collective exhalation under the watchful gaze of the moon. From the camp's edge, one could hear the gentle, ceaseless whisper of the great river, a sound that had been here long before the eagles of Rome arrived and would remain long after they had gone. It was a sound of immense and patient time, a constant, soothing murmur that spoke of journeys from distant mountains to an even more distant sea. Closer, the night was punctuated by the soft, rhythmic sounds of a camp at rest, the gentle rustle of the wind against a thick canvas of the tents, a sound like the turning of a page in a colossal book. The occasional distant nicker of a horse from the picket lines, a soft, contented sound answered by the muffled stamp of a hoof on the packed earth. The low, intermittent crackle of the sentries' watchfires, embers of orange and gold that pulsed like sleeping hearts in the gloom, their smoke rising in slow, aimless spirals towards the indifferent stars. Even the guards who walked the perimeter of the vast encampment seemed to move with a quiet reverence for the hour. The soft crunch of their hobnailed sandals on the gravel pathways was a measured, predictable rhythm, a human counterpoint to the river's timeless flow. The leather of their armor creaked with a familiar, gentle complaint, a sound not of alarm, but of simple, dutiful motion. They were the silent, wakeful guardians of a temporary city of soldiers, their presence a steady, reassuring beat in the deep stillness of the night. At the very heart of this sprawling, sleeping giant stood the praetorium, the emperor's tent. It was larger than the others, certainly, but devoid of any ostentatious grandeur. It was a shelter of function and purpose. Its thick, woolen canvas dyed a deep, earthy red, the color of dried blood and rich soil. It was here, to this island of solitude, that Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, the master of the Roman world, made his way, his walk from the command tent, where the last of the day's dispatches had been read and sealed, was slow and deliberate. The cool night air felt like a balm on his skin, a gentle washing away of the endless, pressing concerns of the day. He was a man in his mid-50s, his beard touched with threads of gray, his shoulders carrying a weight far heavier than the simple woolen cloak draped over them. Yet, he walked not with a slump of exhaustion, but with a straightness of practiced endurance. He had learned, through long and arduous practice, to separate the burdens of the office from the quiet, inner stillness of the man. As he approached his tent, 2 Praetorian guards, standing like bronze statues on either side of the entrance, came silently to attention. Their polished helmets caught the soft glow of the single oil lamp that burned on a post outside, a small beacon of warm, golden light in the cool, silvered darkness. Marcus offered them a slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head, a gesture of acknowledgement not from an emperor to his servants, but from one tired man to 2 others. They returned the nod in perfect, silent synchronicity, their gaze remaining fixed on the shadows beyond, their duty unbroken. He reached for the heavy flap of the tent, the coarse fabric familiar beneath his fingertips. Pushing it aside, he stepped across the threshold, and the sounds of the outer world instantly softened, receding into a muted background hum. He let the flap fall closed behind him, the heavy canvas settling with a soft, final sigh. And in that moment, he was no longer the imperator, the commander of legions, the arbiter of justice for an empire that stretched from the sun-scorched sands of Syria to the misty shores of Britannia. He was simply a man, standing alone in the quiet of his room. The air inside was warm, a gentle, encompassing warmth that seemed to seep into his bones. Its source was a bronze brazier standing in a corner, filled with charcoal that glowed with a deep, ruby-red light, radiating a steady, silent heat. It emitted no smoke, only the faintest, almost invisible shimmer in the air above it, and a low, infrequent crackle as a single ember would shift and settle into its bed of gray ash. The primary source of light was a single, large oil lamp set upon a simple but sturdy wooden desk. Its flame was a steady, unwavering teardrop of gold, burning with a clean, soft hiss that was barely audible. It cast long, gentle shadows that danced with an almost imperceptible slowness on the canvas walls. The tent was an exercise in spare utility. There was no marble, no mosaic, no gilded ornamentation. The floor was covered with thick, dark rugs, their woven patterns softened by wear, which muffled his footsteps as he moved further inside. Against one wall stood his campaign cot, a simple frame of dark wood and stretched leather, upon which lay a neatly folded wool blanket, its texture rough and honest. Beside it, a small wooden stool held a plain earthenware jug of water and a single polished silver cup. At the foot of the cot rested a large, iron-banded wooden chest, its lid closed, containing his clothes and personal effects. The room smelled of this simple life. It smelled of the beeswax used in the lamp oil, a clean, sweet scent that mingled with the faint, earthy aroma of the canvas walls. There was the subtle fragrance of old leather from the cot and the several satchels that lay beside the desk, and a clean, metallic hint of the bronze from the brazier. It was a scent of order, of tranquility, of a space intentionally kept free from the clutter of the world. Marcus moved first to the small stool beside his cot. His movements were unhurried, each one flowing into the next with a mindful grace. He poured a small amount of water from the jug into the silver cup. The water trickled with a clear, liquid music, a sound that seemed to momentarily amplify the surrounding silence. He held the cup in both hands, feeling the cool, smooth metal against his palms. He did not drink immediately, but simply stood for a moment, breathing in the calm air of his sanctuary. He was letting the day fall away from him, sloughing off the roles he was required to play: general, judge, emperor, like a heavy, ceremonial robe. His gaze drifted around the tent, his private world. This small, enclosed space, here on the turbulent frontier, was his truest palace. It was not a place of power, but a place of peace. Here, he was subject to no one's demands but his own. Here, the only voice that mattered was the quiet, rational one within. He took a slow sip of the cool water. It was fresh and clean, a simple, profound pleasure. He set the cup back down on the stool, its silver base making a soft, resonant clink against the dark wood. He turned towards the center of the tent, towards the desk that was the true heart of this space. It was a campaign desk designed to be folded and carried, yet it was solid and well-made. Its surface of polished oak was smooth and dark, reflecting the lamp's golden light in a soft, liquid sheen. On it, a few items were already laid out in a neat and orderly fashion. A small, sealed amphora of wine, another cup, and a stack of official dispatches, written on papyrus and rolled into tight scrolls, bound with red ribbon, waiting for his seal in the morning. For a moment, he regarded them as one might regard sleeping beasts. They held the world's troubles within them, reports of skirmishes along the border, petitions from provincial governors, letters from Rome, filled with the endless churn of politics and personalities. But their time was not now. Day's business was concluded. The night was for something else entirely. He walked to the desk and stood before it. His eyes fell upon a worn leather satchel resting on the floor beside one of the desk's sturdy legs. It was a plain, unadorned thing, its surface softened and scarred by years of travel. Its buckles of tarnished brass were smooth to the touch. This satchel held no military orders or state secrets. It held something far more precious. It held his companion, his solace, his private mirror, his journal. He reached down, his joints creaking softly in the quiet, and lifted the satchel onto the polished surface of the desk. The leather made a soft, sighing sound as it settled on the wood. He ran his hand over its familiar surface, the simple, tactile sensation, a grounding ritual in itself. Here, within this simple bag, was the work of the evening. Here was the conversation he had been waiting all day to have. He looked at his hands in the lamplight. They were not the soft hands of a courtly scholar, but the capable, weathered hands of a man who had spent long years on the move, exposed to the elements. There were calluses on his palms and a network of fine lines across his knuckles. Tonight, these hands, which had the power to sign edicts that could change the lives of millions, would perform a much simpler, much more personal task. They would guide a pen across a page, tracing out the quiet thoughts of a single, searching soul with a sense of gentle anticipation, as if meeting a dear and trusted friend. He reached for the two brass buckles that held the satchel closed. His fingers moved with practiced ease, lifting the small metal tongues from their keepers. The latches came free with a pair of soft, satisfying clicks, the sound sharp and clear in the profound stillness of the tent. He folded back the heavy leather flap, revealing the treasures within. The real work of the evening was about to begin. He folded back the heavy leather flap, revealing the treasures within. The real work of the evening was about to begin. Inside, the satchel, nestled in custom-fitted compartments, lay the simple yet profound tools of a scholar. There was no gleam of gold or flash of gemstones. The value of these objects was in their purpose, their familiar feel, their silent promise of communion with the self. His fingers, moving with a reverence born of nightly ritual, first sought the largest object, a scroll of fresh papyrus. He lifted it from its cradle. It was heavier than one might expect, possessing a satisfying density. The scroll was tightly wound around a slender cylinder of dark wood and tied with a simple linen cord. He placed it on the desk, to the left of the waiting inkpot, and the scroll rolled a quarter turn with a soft, whispery sound before coming to rest. Next, his hand went to a small, heavy object wrapped in a piece of soft doeskin. He unwrapped it with care, folding the supple leather and placing it to one side. Revealed in the lamplight was his inkpot. It was not an ornate vessel, but a practical one, carved from a solid piece of dark green soapstone, cool and smooth to the touch. It was shaped like a low, wide cylinder with a thick, reassuring base that would not be easily overturned. A small cork, sealed with a dark crust of dried beeswax, plugged the opening. He placed it on the desk with a quiet, solid thud, a sound of stability and permanence. The weight of it was grounding Dot from a long, narrow compartment in the satchel. He retrieved a slender wooden case. It was fashioned from cypress wood, its pale grain worn smooth with handling. He slid open the lid, an action that produced a soft, woody rustle and revealed a neat row of reed pens, known as kalami. They lay side by side like sleeping soldiers in their barracks. Some were old friends, their tips worn down from miles of written thought. Others were new, their ends still pale and untouched. The faint, dry scent of the reeds, like the smell of a sun-drenched riverbank, rose to meet him. Finally, from a small leather pouch within the satchel, he took out a penknife. It was a simple tool with a handle of polished bone and a short, keen blade of good Roman steel. He laid it beside the pen case. With these 4 items now arranged before him on the dark wood of the desk, the scroll, the inkpot, the pens, and the knife, his workspace was complete. It was a small altar dedicated to the inner world. His gaze settled on the inkpot. Using the edge of the penknife's blade, he gently worked at the wax seal around the cork. The dried wax flaked away in tiny, dark crumbs onto the desk's surface. He brushed them into his palm and discarded them into a small waste bowl without a sound. Then, with a firm grip on the cool stone, he twisted the cork stopper free. It came loose with a low, satisfying pop, a small, intimate sound that broke the deep silence of the tent. He set the cork beside the inkpot and leaned forward slightly, inhaling the scent that rose from the newly opened well. It was a rich, complex aroma, the scent of the scholar's trade, a slightly sharp, metallic Thames from the iron salts, an earthy, organic note from the oak galls it was brewed with, and the faint, binding scent of acacia gum. It was the smell of recorded thought, of words given form and permanence. His attention then shifted to the cypress case. He let his fingers drift over the collection of pens, feeling their lightness, their subtle differences in thickness and balance. He was searching for the right tool for tonight's conversation. He selected one of medium thickness, its shaft a pale, creamy yellow, its tip already shaped from a previous night's work, but now slightly soft and in need of refreshing. Holding it up to the lamplight, he inspected the nib. It was functional, yes, but not perfect. And for this work, for the quiet ordering of the soul, precision was a form of meditation in itself. He took the small bone-handled knife in his right hand, its weight familiar and comfortable. In his left, he held the reed pen. He angled the tip of the calamus downwards over a spare piece of rough parchment he kept for this very purpose, and began to shave the point. The steel blade was incredibly sharp, and with each practiced gentle stroke, it pared away a tiny, paper-thin curl of the dried reed. The sound was the most delicate of whispers, a soft, rhythmic she that seemed to draw the quiet of the room into its gentle cadence. It was a sound of careful creation, of slow and deliberate refinement. Tiny, fragrant shavings, like miniature scrolls, fell and collected on the scrap parchment below, releasing an even fainter scent of dry grass and sun. He worked with absolute focus, his brow furrowed, not with worry, but with concentration. He was not thinking of the Quadi or the Ayazages tribes across the river. He was not thinking of supply lines or the price of grain in Alexandria. His entire universe, in this moment, had contracted to the point of a knife and the tip of a reed. He carefully sculpted the point into a precise, sharp wedge. Then, turning the pen over, he pressed the very tip of the knife into the center of the nib, extending the ink channel with a barely perceptible split. This tiny channel, invisible from more than a few inches away, was crucial. It would draw the ink from the reservoir of the nib and guide it onto the page in a steady, unbroken line. It was a small act of engineering, perfected over centuries, that made the flow of written language possible. When he was satisfied, he gently blew on the tip, clearing away any lingering dust from his work. The new point was sharp and perfect, a pristine instrument, ready for its task. He laid the knife down, the steel making a soft tick against the wood. He then returned the newly sharpened pen to its place beside the ink pot, its tip now aligned with a purpose. The small pile of pale shavings on the scrap parchment was the only evidence of the quiet, meticulous labor just performed now. It was time for the page itself. He turned to the waiting scroll. He untied the simple linen cord that bound it, coiling the cord neatly and placing it beside the ink pot. Then, with a hand at each end of the central wooden rod, he began to unroll the papyrus across the surface of the desk. The sound was uniquely satisfying, a dry, soft, continuous crackle. It was the sound of potential, of blankness waiting to be filled. The long-forgotten scent of the Nile marshlands, where the reeds for this very paper had grown, was released into the warm air of the tent. A ghostly whisper from a distant corner of his vast empire, the papyrus, having been tightly rolled for weeks or months, had a memory of its own and tried to curl back into its former shape. From a small, heavy pouch, Marcus produced 2 weights. They were not made of gold, but of simple, dark gray lead, worn smooth with use. He placed one weight on the top two corners of the unrolled sheet and the other on the bottom two. There, heaviness gently but firmly persuading the papyrus to lie flat. The writing surface was now prepared, a pale, creamy expanse, its subtle, horizontal fibers catching the golden lamplight, a silent invitation. The stage was set. The tools were prepared. The space was consecrated by silence and solitude. Marcus sat on his simple wooden stool, his posture straight, his breathing slow and even. He took a moment to simply observe the scene before him. The dark ink, the sharp pen, the blank page, each was a silent participant in the ritual. This was the pause, the deep breath before the first word. It was a moment of pure potential, a threshold between the silent mind and the written word. His gaze softened. The world outside the tent, with its wars and its worries, had vanished completely. The past day, with its endless duties, was a dream half remembered. The future, with its unknowable challenges, had not yet been born. There was only this present moment, perfect and complete. The gentle hiss of the oil lamp, the soft, radiant heat from the brazier, the smooth, waiting surface of the papyrus. With a final, slow exhalation, he let go of the last vestiges of the emperor. He was now only the philosopher, the student, the man conversing with his own soul. His right hand, steady and sure, reached out. His fingers wrapped around the smooth shaft of the newly sharpened calamus. He lifted the pen from the desk. It felt light, an extension of his own hand, his own intention. He moved it over the open mouth of the soapstone inkpot, the sharp point hovering over the still, black pool within. He paused for a heartbeat, then dipped the pen. The tip disappeared into the darkness. He felt the slight resistance as it entered the ink, a gentle, liquid embrace. He held it there for a second, allowing the tiny channel in the nib to drink its fill. Then, slowly, he lifted it out. A single, perfect, glistening drop of black ink clung to the point, trembling ever so slightly in the warm lamplight, a tiny, dark star against the pale reed. He moved the pen over the waiting expanse of the papyrus, his hand hovering a few inches above the surface. The ink did not fall. It waited, obedient to his will. In the absolute quiet, he could almost hear the beating of his own heart, a slow, steady rhythm marking the passage of this precious, peaceful time. He was ready. He was ready. His hand, suspended in the warm, still air of the tent, descended with a slow and steady grace. The tip of the reed pen, laden with its single, perfect drop of ink, made contact with the surface of the papyrus. There was no sound at first, only the silent meeting of ink and fiber. The black liquid bloomed instantly, soaking into the pale, thirsty page, a tiny, dark flower opening in a field of cream. Then his hand began to move, and the sound began. It was a soft, dry, rhythmic scratching. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound of the firm reed nib traversing the woven fibers of the paper. It was a gentle, intimate sound, the voice of thought being given physical form. It filled the silence of the tent, not with noise, but with a texture of serene activity. It was a sound that spoke of purpose, of order being drawn from the quiet chaos of the mind. It was the sound of a man speaking to himself in the only way that truly mattered. He wrote, not in Latin, the language of law and command, but in Greek, the language of philosophy and the soul. His hand moved with a fluid, practiced ease, forming the elegant, curved letters of the alphabet. Each letter was a small, deliberate act of creation, flowing from the one before it and leading to the one that followed. A chain of reasoning forged in ink. As his hand moved, the thoughts flowed with it, not as a torrent, but as a calm and steady stream, like the great river murmuring beyond the canvas walls. He began, as he often did, with the day that had just ended, letting it go, placing it onto the page so that he no longer had to carry it. The day is done. The scratching pen seemed to say, the sun rose and it has now set. The duties it brought are now concluded. There were reports from the scouts, arguments between tribunes, a request for reinforcements that cannot be spared. There was dust and heat and the weariness of men. All of it happened. It flowed over and around me like water around a stone in a riverbed. The stone does not complain. It does not wish the water were warmer or flowed more slowly. It is simply a stone, and I must simply be myself. His hand paused for a moment as he dipped the calamus back into the cool, dark well of the ink pot. The brief silence was punctuated by the gentle hiss of the lamp, a constant, soothing companion. He lifted the pen, again heavy with ink, and his gaze fell upon the words he had just written. The black ink was still wet, glistening in the lamplight. He watched as the liquid slowly soaked into the papyrus, losing its sheen, becoming a permanent part of the page. It was a small, quiet transformation, and it pleased him. The thought had been released. It was captured. The scratching resumed, a steady, lulling rhythm in the warm stillness. His mind turned inward to the very space from which these thoughts arose. This tent, this small circle of lamplight in the vast darkness of the frontier, feels like a sanctuary. The motion of his hand continued. But the true sanctuary is not made of canvas or wood. It is here. He might have unconsciously touched his own temple with the fingers of his free hand. All the noise of the camp, the fear of the coming battle, the endless whispers from Rome, they cannot enter here unless I allow them. An angry word from a centurion, a poorly executed drill, a bleak report, these things are external. They are merely sounds or words on a page. They only gain the power to disturb my peace if I judge them to be disturbing. The fortress of a calm and rational mind is impregnable. I must remember to keep the gates closed to passing fears and trivial anxieties. The brazier in the corner gave a soft crackle, a single bright ember flaring for a moment before settling back into its gentle, radiant glow. A soft gust of wind brushed against the outside of the tent, and the heavy canvas rippled with a sound like a deep, slow breath. Marcus did not look up. He was entirely absorbed in the steady, flowing conversation between his mind and the page. The scratching of the pen was his anchor, the physical act of writing a form of meditation that held his focus and calmed his spirit. He wrote of the great cosmic order, the logos, the divine reason that governed all things. His perspective widened, expanding from the small tent to encompass the entire universe. Look up at the stars at night. The moving pen whispered across the page. See their silent, endless turning. They follow their path without protest, without haste, without error. The river outside flows to the sea. The seed becomes a sapling, the sapling a tree, and the tree eventually falls and becomes earth again, from which new seeds will grow. All of this is a single, vast, interconnected web of cause and effect, and I am a part of it. My life, my breath, my thoughts, my death, they are all woven into this same grand tapestry. Why, then, should I fear my own small part in this magnificent design? To be anxious is to wish the universe were other than it is. To be at peace is to accept my nature and the nature of all things with grace and wonder. The pale, creamy surface of the papyrus was slowly filling with neat, elegant lines of dark Greek text. The column of writing grew steadily downwards, a testament to the quiet, ordered working of his mind. He was not creating a grand philosophical system for others to follow. He was simply reminding himself of the truths he had learned, reinforcing the foundations of his own tranquility. It was an act of mental housekeeping, of sweeping out the dust of the day and putting his inner world back in order. He paused again, this time to shift his weight on the simple stool. He stretched his back, feeling a slight stiffness from sitting. He looked at his own hand the one holding the pen. He saw the network of veins and the fine lines etched into the skin. This hand, this body, the scratch resumed, is a temporary vessel. It is made of flesh and bone, just like the body of the lowest stable boy or the highest senator. Feels heat and cold, weariness, and one day it will cease to function. It is not truly me. It is something I am using for a time. The true self is the part that thinks, that reasons, that chooses. The directing mind. I must care for this body as a rider cares for his horse, keeping it healthy and functional, but I must not confuse the horse for the rider. The rider's journey is the one that matters. His thoughts then turned, as they often did, to the other people he shared the world with. His mind drifted back to a contentious meeting earlier in the day with a legate, a proud and difficult man who saw only obstacles and slights. At the time, Marcus had felt a flicker of irritation. Now, in the calm of the night, he examined that feeling with a gentle, dispassionate curiosity. Today, I encountered a man who was arrogant, contrary, and selfish. It is no surprise. There are many such men in the world. It would be foolish to expect otherwise, like expecting a fig tree not to produce figs. But he acts this way only out of ignorance. He believes that power and status are the highest goods, and so he grasps for them, causing himself and others distress. He is like a man lost in the dark, flailing and striking out at shadows. Should I be angry at a blind man for stumbling? No, I should try to light a lamp for him if I can. And if I cannot, I must simply not allow him to pull me into the darkness with him. My tranquility does not depend on his wisdom. My good depends only on my own right actions. The scratching of the calamus was the only sound now. A steady, continuous whisper. The column of text was long, reaching the bottom of the exposed sheet. He placed the pen carefully into a groove on his cypress case and reached for the lead weights at the bottom of the papyrus. He lifted them, and with his other hand on the wooden rod at the bottom, he gently rolled the scroll upwards, exposing a fresh, blank surface below. The already written portion, now covered, was safely wound within the roll. He replaced the weights on the new bottom corners, securing the page once more. The vast, empty space invited him to continue. He picked up the pen again, but did not dip it immediately. He leaned back slightly, his eyes half closed, his breathing deep and even. He felt a sense of quiet clarity, a profound and simple peacefulness. The act of writing was like pouring out clouded water, allowing the sediment to settle until all that remained was clear and pure. The day's anxieties had been named, examined, and released. The vast, impersonal beauty of the cosmos had been acknowledged. The duties of a man among men had been reaffirmed. He felt not the satisfaction of pride or accomplishment, but the simple, restorative feeling of returning to himself. He had realigned his own mind with the principles he sought to live by. He had spent time in his inner citadel, reinforcing its walls, clearing its courtyards. The emperor was gone, and the philosopher was at peace. He gazed for a moment at the steady, golden flame of the oil lamp, watching the way it drew the dark oil up the wick to transform it into light and warmth. A simple, natural process. He felt a kinship with it. A man, too, could draw on his inner resources to create light in the darkness. He took another slow, deep breath, the air filling his lungs, and then let it out in a long, quiet sigh of contentment. He picked up his pen, his resolve renewed, and dipped it once more into the waiting ink. There was more to say. The night was still young, and the conversation was not yet over. There was more to say. The night was still young, and the conversation was not yet over. The newly inked tip of the calamus once again touched the waiting papyrus, and the soft, rhythmic scratching resumed its steady, peaceful cadence. The second column of Greek letters began to form alongside the first, a new stream of thought flowing into the quiet vessel of the page. His mind, now calm and clear, drifted towards those he loved. The threads of his life that stretched far from this cold frontier, back to the warm, sunlit heart of Rome. He thought of his wife, Faustina. He pictured her face, not with a pang of longing, but with a gentle, appreciative warmth. He saw her as a partner in the great, strange play of life. Another soul walking her own path alongside his dot. We are like two trees growing in the same field. The pen seemed to murmur as it moved. Our roots may intertwine beneath the soil, but our branches reach for the sun independently. I cannot control her thoughts or her feelings, nor she mine. I can only offer her the best of myself, my kindness, my honesty, my fidelity. Her own choices, her own happiness are hers to cultivate. To love her is not to possess her, but to wish for her to flourish according to her own nature. May she find peace in her own inner citadel, just as I seek it in mine. The thought was free of anxiety, free of the need for anything to be different than it was. It was an acceptance, a quiet blessing sent on the night air. His mind then turned to his children, and a particular tenderness softened the line of his mouth. He thought of his son, Commodus, a boy on the cusp of manhood, so full of life and fire. A quiet hope, a prayer, almost formed in his mind and flowed down his arm, through his fingers, and onto the page. For my son. The dark ink bled into the pale fibers. I wish not for victories in battle or the applause of the Senate. These things are smoke. I wish for him to find the path of reason. May he learn to govern his own passions before he is ever asked to govern an empire. May he understand that true strength is not in commanding others, but in commanding oneself. The rest is in the hands of the gods, woven into the great pattern. My duty is to be a good father, to offer good counsel, and to provide a good example. The outcome is not mine to control, and so I will love him without fear for what he might become, and focus only on what I can give him today. A father's steady and unconditional regard. The scratching paused. He lifted his head, and his gaze became distant, looking past the canvas walls of the tent, as if he could see all the way to Rome. But there was no sadness in his expression, only a profound sense of perspective. He was one man, one father, one husband, in a long, unbroken chain stretching back into the mists of time. This led his thoughts to the great, silent tide of mortality itself. He dipped his pen again, the motion now deeply ingrained, automatic. He touched it to the page. Think of the court of Augustus. He wrote, the letters forming with a steady, unhurried precision. His wife, his daughter, his descendants, his court, his guards, his sycophants, all of them gone. All of them dust. Think of Pompeii and Herculaneum, cities silenced in an afternoon. Think of all the great men whose names we praise. Scipio, Cato, the noble Brutus. They lived, they breathed, they strove, and now they are nothing but stories. And one day, not so long from now, Marcus Aurelius will be just another name in a list, another story told. This life is a brief inhalation, a fleeting appearance on a vast stage. Why treat it with such desperate seriousness? This body, these honors, this very name, they are all borrowed. The only thing that is truly mine is how I choose to live in this short interval. Let me live it with justice towards others, with piety towards the gods, and with a calm acceptance of the great turning wheel of existence. A deep, slow yawn caught him by surprise. He brought a hand to his mouth, his eyes watering slightly from the effort of suppressing it. He blinked, and the golden flame of the oil lamp seemed to swim for a moment, its halo of light blurring at the edges. He felt a pleasant heaviness settling deep into his bones, a weariness not of the mind, but of the body. The long day, the weight of his armor, the endless walking and standing, were finally making their claims. His hand, as it resumed its work, seemed to move a little more slowly. The scratching sound became more deliberate, less of a continuous flow, and more of a conscious, step-by-step progression. The night was deepening. Outside, the sounds of the camp had faded into an almost absolute silence, leaving only the endless, soft murmur of the river and the whisper of the wind. He drew his thoughts back from the grand sweep of history to the simple, tangible reality of the present moment. This, he knew, was the final and most important refuge. Do not let your mind wander to the past, for it cannot be changed, the pen inscribed. Its journey across the page, nearing its end for the night. Do not let it race to the future, for it is unknown and not yet yours. Dwell here, in this single moment. What is this moment? It is the feeling of the rough wool of my tunic against my skin. It is the scent of beeswax from the lamp. It is the sight of this black ink flowing onto this pale page. This is all that is real. The past is a ghost. The future is a dream. Only the present is ours to live in. Let me perform this one action, the writing of this last sentence, with my full and undivided attention, as if it were the most important thing in the world. For in this moment it is. He wrote the final word of the thought. He carefully formed the last letter, then lifted the pen from the page. He did not move to dip it again. He simply held it, its tip pointing downwards, a tiny droplet of ink, still clinging to the nib before it was absorbed by the dry air. He had reached a natural conclusion. The conversation was complete for the night. The mind had been aired, tidied, and, put to rest, he placed the calamus carefully back in its cypress wood case, laying it in its groove with a soft click. His work was done. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, and read over the last few lines he had written. The Greek letters stood in neat, orderly rows, a testament to a mind that had successfully sought and found its own center. A feeling of deep, quiet satisfaction washed over him. It was the feeling of a duty performed not for the empire or for glory or for others, but for himself. It was the feeling of being whole. His eyes felt heavy now, the muscles around them tired from focusing on the page. The oil lamp had burned down noticeably, its flame smaller and more yellow than before, casting a warmer, softer glow. It had been a good evening's work, a necessary evening's work. It was time to let the body have the same peace that the mind had now found. He looked at the inkpot, still open, and the scroll, still unrolled, upon his desk. The ritual of writing was finished, but the ritual of closing the day had one last, gentle chapter. He looked at the inkpot, still open and the scroll still unrolled upon his desk. The ritual of writing was finished, but the ritual of closing. The day had one last gentle chapter. The process of putting his tools away was as much a part of the meditation as the writing itself. It was the final sealing of the day, a conscious act of closure. His hand went first to the soapstone inkpot. He picked up the cork stopper, its surface cool and slightly waxy beneath his fingertips. He aligned it with the opening of the pot and pressed it down firmly. It slid into place with a soft, muted sigh, creating a perfect seal. The rich, earthy scent of the ink was now contained, its work done for the night. He took the small square of soft doeskin and carefully wrapped the heavy pot, folding the supple leather around its cool, smooth sides. The inkpot, now shrouded in darkness, was returned to its custom-fitted compartment in the satchel. The leather muffled any sound as it settled into its place. Next, he turned his attention to the pen. He picked up the calamus, its nib still faintly dark with the last traces of ink. He rose slowly from his stool and walked the few paces to the small table beside his cot, where the jug of water and his silver cup rested. Pouring a small amount of fresh, clean water into the cup, he returned to his desk. He dipped the tip of the pen into the clear water. Instantly, the residual ink began to dissolve, blooming outwards from the nib in ethereal, smoky clouds of black and gray that swirled and faded in the small cup. He moved the pen gently, washing the tip until the water ran clear from it. Then, taking a small, clean piece of linen from a pouch, he carefully dried the sharpened point, pinching it gently to absorb the last drop of moisture. The reed was now clean, pale, and ready for its next use. He placed it back in its cypress wood case, its tip resting in its designated groove. He slit the lid closed, the smooth wood whispering shut with a soft, final shush. The case, too, was returned to the satchel. Now, only the scroll remained on the desk, its story told for the evening. He lifted the two lead weights from its bottom corners, their heaviness a familiar comfort in his palm. He placed them together on the desk with a soft, dull clack. Then he reached for the bottom edge of the papyrus. With slow, deliberate movements, he began to roll the scroll upwards, back towards its central wooden rod. The sound was a soft, continuous rustle, the reverse of the sound of its opening. The lines of dark Greek text, the physical form of his most private thoughts, disappeared, one by one, as they were gathered into the tight cylinder. The day's reflections, the worries examined, the gratitude expressed, all were now furled away, consigned to the quiet privacy of the scroll. When it was fully rolled, he held the dense cylinder in his hand for a moment, feeling its weight. He picked up the coiled linen cord and, with practiced fingers, wound it around the scroll's middle and tied a simple, secure knot. His thoughts were now bound and put away. He placed the scroll into its long compartment in the satchel next to the pen case. The bone-handled knife and the lead weights followed, each placed in its proper spot. The orderliness of the act was itself a source of peace. He folded the heavy leather flap over the top of the satchel. He guided the brass tongues into their keepers and pressed them home. 2 soft, final clicks echoed in the quiet tent. The ritual was complete. Lifting the satchel, he placed it back in its accustomed spot on the floor, beside the leg of the desk, ready for the next evening. The desk was now clear, its polished surface reflecting only the gentle, fading light of the lamp. Marcus stood for a moment, letting a feeling of completeness settle over him. The work of the day was done. The work of the soul was done. Now, all that remained was the simple, honest work of rest. He walked back to the small table by his cot and drank the rest of the water in his cup. It was cool and refreshing, washing away the lingering taste of weariness. His movements remained slow and deliberate as he prepared for sleep. He untied the belt at his waist and removed his outer tunic, the heavy wool whispering as it came over his head. He did not toss it aside, but folded it with care, a crease down the middle, then the sleeves folded over. He laid the neat square of fabric on top of the large wooden chest at the foot of his cot. He was now clad only in a simple linen undertunic. He turned to the last light in the room. The oil lamp had served him faithfully through his reflections. Now its service, too, was at an end. He reached out, and his fingers found the small bronze key that controlled the wick. He gave it a slow quarter turn. The golden flame, which had been his steady companion for hours, seemed to bow in response. It shrank, drawing in on itself, its halo of light contracting. For a brief moment, it became a tiny, brilliant blue bead at the tip of the wick. Then, with a final, almost inaudible sigh, it vanished. A thin, delicate tendril of gray smoke rose in its place, carrying the last of the scent of burnt beeswax into the air before it. Too dissolved into the shadows. The tent was plunged into a deep and profound darkness, a darkness made absolute by the sudden absence of the light. But it was not a cold or empty darkness. After a moment, as his eyes adjusted, the tent began to resolve itself again, painted now not in light, but in warmth. The brazier in the corner still glowed with a deep, therapeutic heat. Its charcoal embers were no longer bright red, but a soft, dark, pulsating ruby. It cast no sharp shadows, only a gentle, ambient radiance that suffused the entire space with a feeling of safety and peace. The canvas walls seemed to recede, and the small tent felt like a cavern of perfect calm. He moved towards the cot, his bare feet silent on the thick rugs. He could feel the gentle warmth of the brazier on the side of his face. He sat down on the edge of the cot, and the stretched leather creaked softly, a familiar, comforting sound. He swung his legs up and lay his head back upon the simple pillow, which was filled with straw and smelled faintly of dry fields. Then he reached down and pulled the heavy wool blanket up over his body. The blanket was coarse against his skin, a simple, honest texture. But its weight was immensely comforting, a gentle pressure that seemed to soothe his tired limbs. It was the weight of security, of surrender. He settled onto his back, his hands resting on his stomach, and closed his eyes. The world was now reduced to its most fundamental sensations. The gentle, pervasive warmth radiating from the brazier, the comforting weight of the blanket upon his body, the faint, clean smell of beeswax and old leather in the air. Outside, beyond the canvas, the vast, quiet universe continued its turning. The river flowed on its endless journey to the sea. The wind whispered secrets to the tall grasses of the plains. The stars wheeled in their silent, majestic procession across the deep black sky. He was a part of it all. A small part, but a part nonetheless. A single, tired man in a tent on the edge of a great empire. An emperor, a philosopher, a husband, a father. But now, he was none of those things. He was simply a consciousness preparing for its own quiet journey into oblivion. His breathing, which had been slow and deliberate, now began to deepen, a long, slow breath in, and a long, soft breath out. The air entering his lungs felt cool and clean. The air leaving felt warm and heavy. In and out. The rhythm of his own body was the only clock now. Each breath was a small wave, rising and falling on a peaceful, silent sea. The thoughts in his mind began to lose their shape. They softened, their edges blurring like ink dissolving in water. The camp, the river, the stars. His breathing deepened further still. It was the slow, steady rhythm of true rest, of a body and a mind in perfect accord, warm and quiet. And still, the day was done. The book was closed. The light was out. The emperor slept.